My teacher finally admitted to being racist against me, not realizing my principal was watching the whole time. The day Mr. White found out I was an inner-city transfer, she made it her mission to fuel my imposter syndrome. And today was no different. TJ, since you're so good with urban technology, why don't you set up the laptop while I use the bathroom? You see, I'd spent the last 3 months scheming with Principal Lint to get evidence for how she'd been treating me. So while Miss White was in the bathroom, everyone watched as I logged onto Zoom and started a call with Lint. And when everything was set up, I strategically placed my Yale acceptance letter, aka Ragebait, right on my desk where she'd see it. When Miss White came back and saw it, she laughed. Class, this is why college admissions are broken. Merit doesn't matter anymore when you check the right boxes. Bingo. Behind her I caught Beth, the popular girl, mouthing, "I'm sorry." But Miss White was on a roll and pulled out my lunch, gas station food. Again. She unwrapped it slightly, nose wrinkling. "Stand up, TJ. Show everyone your shoes." My legs felt heavy as I stood. The sole of my left shoe had started separating last week, and I'd been using superglue to hold it together. This is why we have dress codes, to maintain standards. Then her eyes landed on the small stain on my uniform shirt. "Did your single mommy forget to wash it? Or do you only own one uniform?" The words hit exactly where she wanted them to. "Your mother works 3 jobs for this?" She held up my last chemistry quiz. "And you got a B+?" She shook her head slowly, theatrically. "All those teachers who vouched for you. What a waste. Mr. Blake, Miss Callahan, even Principal Lint. They stuck their necks out for what? For you to get into university to fill a diversity quota?" Leah whispered. "This is so messed up," to her lab partner. Miss White's head snapped toward her, but she continued, her voice getting louder. "Your little brother looks up to you? Poor kid doesn't know better. Doesn't know his hero can barely maintain a B average at a real school." Chase Johnson, our quarterback, finally had enough. He stood up, all 6 feet of him. "Mrs. White, this isn't—" "Sit down, Chase!" Her scream made everyone jump. "Or you'll be next. Don't think your scholarship makes you special." There was a slight echo from the speakers when she yelled. "Is that microphone on?" She glanced at the computer but shook her head, assuming it was from the intercom system. Even Sophie Williams, the teacher's pet since freshman year, looked pale as she watched Ms. White circle back to me like a shark. "You cheated on the Yale application. Admit it." She was so close I could smell her coffee breath. "Your type always claims racism when held accountable, but I know what you are. A charity case who gamed the system. Tell everyone why you can't go on the field trip next month." She was enjoying this. When I stayed silent, she answered for me. "Because even the subsidized cost is too much. Isn't that right? Your father in prison?" she asked, knowing damn well my dad died serving overseas. "That's usually the story, isn't it? Dead or in jail. Which one is yours?" Then quieter, so only I could hear, "Immigration checks employment records these days, even for citizens. Would be a shame if someone reported your mother's 3 jobs to the IRS. You're threatening me." I said it loud enough for the Zoom call to hear. "Threatening?" She laughed. "I'm just sharing information. I have over 20 years of experience protecting this school from your kind. Just like you protected it with Deshaun Okafor?" The entire room froze. I knew I was taking a risk, but I needed her to finally confess. She was so hungry for recognition that she kept talking, spiraling with self-obsession. One email about his gang affiliations was all it took for his Cornell scholarship to be revoked. Last I heard, he was working at Dollar Tree. "That was you?" Chase said from the back, his voice shaking. "Deshaun was my cousin. He never did anything wrong." She was pacing now, lost in her own power trip. "I've given ICE addresses. Legal or not, they always investigate. Amazing what happens when anonymous tips come from concerned teachers." That's when I said it. The words that would end everything. "Miss White, you might want to look at your computer screen." She spun around, confused. Then she saw it. The Zoom window she'd minimized. The one showing Principal Lint's face. And next to her, Superintendent Scarlett, the school board president. Miss White's eyes widened. "What the—" Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Her face went completely white like someone drained all the blood out of it. The classroom got so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Principal Lint's voice came through the speakers, calm and professional like she was reading a script. She told Miss White to end the lesson right now and stay in the classroom. Miss White just stood there frozen, staring at the screen like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Then she lunged for the mouse, her hands shaking so bad she could barely click. She kept trying to close the Zoom window, her fingers slipping off the trackpad. She started talking really fast, saying something about context and how we didn't understand what she meant. Principal Lint cut her off mid-sentence and said an administrator would arrive soon. I stayed frozen at my desk with the Yale letter still sitting there in plain view. My hands felt numb, and I couldn't look away from Miss White's face as her whole world fell apart right in front of me. She kept clicking and stammering, trying to explain herself to the screen, but Principal Lint's face just stayed neutral and professional. Superintendent Scarlett hadn't said a word yet, just sat there next to Principal Lint watching everything. The other kids in class were looking back and forth between me and Miss White like they were watching a tennis match. An administrative aide I'd never seen before walked into the classroom exactly 5 minutes later. She was this short woman in a gray suit who moved really fast and efficient. She walked straight to my desk and quietly asked me to gather my things. Her voice was so low that only I could hear it. She turned to address the class and told everyone that school was dismissed early today. She said they should go to their next period or leave campus if it was their last class of the day. I started shoving my stuff into my backpack, trying not to look at anyone. I could feel every single person's eyes on me. The Yale letter got crumpled as I stuffed it in with my notebooks. Someone whispered something behind me, but I couldn't make out the words. The whispers started spreading before I even zipped up my bag. I slung my backpack over one shoulder and followed the aide toward the door. Miss White was still standing near her desk, looking lost and confused. She didn't even try to stop me or say anything. The walk to the principal's office felt like it took forever, even though it was just down 2 hallways. My legs felt shaky and weird, like they might give out any second. I kept replaying Miss White's face when she saw the Zoom call in my head over and over. The aide walked beside me without saying anything at all. Her face stayed completely blank and neutral. I couldn't tell if I was in trouble or if she was protecting me or what was happening. We passed some other students in the hallway, and they all stared. One girl I recognized from English class stopped walking and just watched us go by. The fluorescent lights felt too bright and made my head hurt. My backpack felt heavier than normal, even though I didn't have that many books in it. The aide's shoes made clicking sounds on the tile floor that echoed in the empty hallway. Every step felt important somehow, like I was walking toward something huge that I couldn't take back. Principal Lint was already waiting in her office when we got there. She told me to sit down right away, and her voice sounded much warmer than it did on the Zoom call. She explained that the recording captured everything clearly, and that was good. She pushed a legal pad and pen across her desk toward me. She asked me to write down a statement about what happened today, and also about the past 3 months. She said to be as detailed and factual as possible. I picked up the pen, and my hand felt numb and disconnected from my arm. I started writing, but the words came out messy at first. I had to cross out the first sentence and start over. Principal Lint sat quietly at her desk doing paperwork while I wrote. The clock on the wall ticked really loud. I wrote about Miss White's comments today, the gas station food, my shoes, the threats about my mom's jobs. Then I went back further and wrote about the past 3 months of small comments and microaggressions. My hand started cramping after the second page, but I kept going. I wanted to get every detail right because I knew this mattered. The statement ended up being 4 pages long by the time I finished. My handwriting got sloppier toward the end because my hand hurt so much. After I finished writing and put the pen down, Principal Lint looked up from her paperwork. She asked if I wanted to call my mom. Suddenly I realized I really needed to hear her voice more than anything. My throat felt tight and my eyes got hot. Principal Lint pushed her office phone across the desk toward me. I dialed my mom's cell number with shaking fingers. She answered on the second ring even though she was at work. I could hear machines beeping in the background. Her voice immediately got worried when she realized it was me calling from the school. I told her what happened as fast as I could, trying to keep my voice steady. She was quiet for a few seconds after I finished. Then she said she was proud of me, even though her voice was shaking. We agreed she'd come to the school right after her shift ended at 4. She had to go because her supervisor was looking at her, but she told me she loved me before hanging up. I put the phone back on Principal Lint's desk and wiped my eyes with my sleeve before any tears could fall. Principal Lint folded her hands on her desk and looked at me directly. She explained that the district would assign someone called an independent investigator to review everything. She said Miss White was removed from classroom duties starting right now. The process would take some time, though, and I needed to be patient while they followed proper procedures. She used those exact words, proper procedures, like she'd said them 100 times before. I felt this weird mix of relief and frustration at the same time. Part of me had expected this to be over already, like Ms. White would just get fired immediately, but Principal Lint made it clear this was going to drag out. She said the investigator would probably want to interview me and other students who witnessed things. She told me to keep copies of any evidence I had, like texts or emails. Her voice stayed professional and calm the whole time, but I could tell she was being careful about what she said, like there were legal things she couldn't promise me. When I finally left Principal Lint's office to head to my next class, the hallway felt completely different. It was like everyone knew something big had happened, even though most of them didn't know the details yet. I walked past the main office and saw the secretary whispering to another teacher. They both stopped talking when they saw me. Near the lockers, I heard 2 seniors talking and caught my name. One of them said something about a trap and then said, "Quota kid." My stomach dropped so fast it felt like being on a roller coaster. I walked faster and kept my eyes on the floor. I didn't want to see anyone's face or make eye contact. My next class was history, and I slipped into my seat right as the bell rang. The teacher gave me a weird look, but didn't say anything. I pulled out my notebook and pretended to take notes, but my hand just moved the pen around without writing actual words. By the time I got home that afternoon, my phone was completely blowing up. I had like 50 unread messages from group chats I didn't even know I was in. Most of it was people speculating and spreading rumors about what happened. Someone said Miss White had a breakdown. Someone else said I secretly recorded her illegally. I scrolled through it all feeling sick. Then I saw a private message from Beth saying she was sorry for not speaking up sooner. Chase sent me a text too that just said he was proud of me, and that took guts. I stared at both messages for a long time, but I didn't know how to respond. What was I supposed to say to that? I turned my phone face down on my desk so I wouldn't see any more notifications coming in. My little brother knocked on my door asking if I was okay because Mom had texted him. I told him I was fine and that we'd talk about it later. He left, but I could tell he didn't believe me. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling and kept replaying the whole scene over and over in my head. I wondered if using the Yale letter as bait was too manipulative. Part of me felt completely justified because it worked, and Ms. White said all those horrible things on her own. But another part of me felt guilty about setting the whole thing up, even though she chose to say everything she said. Nobody forced her to make those comments. Nobody made her threaten my mom or admit to sabotaging Deshawn's scholarship. She did all that herself. But I still felt weird about it, like maybe I'd crossed some kind of line. I grabbed my phone and looked at the time. It was 3 a.m. and my brain just wouldn't shut off. I thought about all the kids in class watching it happen. I thought about Chase finding out what happened to his cousin. I thought about my mom having to leave work to come deal with this. I thought about my little brother getting teased. Everything felt heavy and complicated, and I couldn't figure out if I'd done the right thing or just made everything worse for everyone, including myself. I finally fell asleep around 4 a.m. and woke up 3 hours later to my phone buzzing with a new email. I grabbed it off my nightstand and saw it was from Principal Lint, sent at 6 a.m. The subject line said, "Important, investigation protocol," and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. She was asking all students involved to refrain from posting about the incident on social media while the investigation was ongoing. The email used a lot of formal language about protecting the integrity of the process and following district policy. I read it twice and felt angry, even though part of me understood she was probably just following legal advice. It felt like she was telling me to be quiet and not make waves. I deleted the email without responding and threw my phone back on my bed. My mom knocked on my door, asking if I was getting ready for school, and I told her I'd be out in 10 minutes. I got dressed in my uniform and checked my phone again before heading downstairs. Leah had texted me at 7 saying she wanted to tell the investigator what she heard Ms. White say. Her message was really supportive and said she had my back no matter what. I felt a little better reading it and typed out a quick reply thanking her. Then I opened a new message and sent one to Sophie, asking if she would be willing to talk to the investigator too. The message showed as read almost immediately, but she didn't respond. The read receipt just sat there, and I stared at it for like 2 minutes waiting for the typing bubbles to appear. They never did. I screenshot Leah's text just in case I needed proof later that someone was backing me up. Before leaving for school, I sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and started writing out everything I could remember from the past 3 months. I put dates next to each incident when I could remember them and listed witnesses who were there. Miss White commenting on my lunch. Miss White making jokes about affirmative action when we talked about college. Miss White asking if my mom spoke English at home. Miss White suggesting I only got good grades because teachers felt sorry for me. Organizing it all on paper made me realize just how much I had been putting up with. Every time I thought I was done remembering something else, another comment or look or moment came back. The document ended up being 4 pages long, single-spaced, and my hand was cramping by the time I finished. I folded it up and put it in my backpack, then headed to the school. Walking into Miss White's classroom felt weird. There was a substitute teacher I had never seen before standing at the front organizing papers on the desk. The room went completely silent when I walked through the door. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I walked to my seat and sat down. Someone in the back muttered something that sounded like setting people up, but I couldn't tell who said it. The substitute either didn't hear it or pretended not to. She introduced herself and said we'd be working on review problems today. The whole class period felt awkward and tense. During lunch, I was sitting with my tray when I got called down to the counseling office over the intercom. I threw away most of my food and walked down the hallway wondering if I was in trouble. When I got there, the secretary told me to go into Ramona Lee's office. I had only met her maybe twice before for scheduling stuff. She smiled when I walked in and told me to sit down. She asked how I was holding up and I said I was fine, even though I wasn't. She explained that the school had support services available, including therapy and academic accommodations if I needed them. She handed me a resource sheet with phone numbers and websites. I took it and folded it into my pocket, thanking her. She said her door was always open if I needed to talk, and I nodded before leaving. 2 days passed, and I tried to focus on my regular classes and homework. Then Principal Lint sent another email saying the district had assigned an investigator named Cristabel Santiago who would be scheduling interviews with me and other witnesses. She included Cristabel's contact information and said I could have my mom or another adult present during the interview if I wanted. The email felt official and serious in a way that made everything feel more real. I forwarded it to my mom, and she replied saying she would definitely be there. By the end of that week, rumors were spreading everywhere. I was walking to my locker when Chase came up to me looking stressed. He said he heard from a teacher who was friends with his mom that Miss White had hired a strong union representative and was claiming the whole thing was entrapment. The word made me feel sick to my stomach because it sounded like I had done something wrong instead of just exposing what she said. Chase told me not to worry about it, but I could tell he was worried too. The following Monday, my mom took off work and we drove to the district office together. We sat in a conference room with Cristabel Santiago, who looked professional in a blazer and had a laptop open in front of her. She was calm and asked specific questions about what happened without making me feel judged. She wanted to know exactly what Miss White said and when she said it. She asked about other students who were there. She took detailed notes on her laptop and asked if she could record the interview. I said yes, and she turned on a small recorder. My mom sat next to me the whole time and added things when I forgot details. Cristabel asked why I placed the Yale letter on my desk, and I explained it wasn't random bait. I told her about the pattern of comments Miss White made about affirmative action and diversity quotas over the past 3 months. I walked her through all the incidents I had written down in my timeline. My mom mentioned conversations we had at home about how stressed I was. Cristabel nodded and wrote everything down without interrupting me. She asked follow-up questions that were really specific, like what time of day things happened and who was sitting nearby. The interview lasted almost an hour. When we were done, Cristabel thanked us and said she would be in touch. My mom and I drove back home, and neither of us said much. That afternoon, I got a text from Ramona asking if I could come by her office after school the next day. When I showed up, she had printed out all my screenshots and my timeline document. She suggested we organize everything into a clean folder with tabs for different categories. We made sections for comments about my family, academic discrimination, and threats. She showed me how to arrange it so it looked professional and easy to follow. We included the screenshots from Leah and my 4-page timeline. Working with her made me feel less like I was fighting this alone. She told me this was a real case with real evidence, and that I should feel confident about that. I left her office feeling a little bit stronger than when I walked in. The next day, I woke up to an email from the district office that had been sent to all parents at 6 in the morning. The subject line said, "Update on ongoing personnel matter," and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. The email used careful language about how the district takes all concerns seriously, and an independent investigation was underway, but then it said that certain comments had been taken out of context, and that the district was committed to protecting the rights of all employees. Within 2 hours, the email had been forwarded to students, and screenshots were all over group chats. I saw kids in the hallway before first period talking about both sides and how maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. My carefully organized evidence with dates and witnesses suddenly felt like it didn't matter because the district was already spinning the narrative. I texted my mom a screenshot of the email, and she replied saying this was exactly why we needed to keep documenting everything. During second period, I got called down to the main office over the intercom, and my heart started racing. Principal Lint was waiting in her office and asked me to close the door. She sat behind her desk and told me she wanted to talk about how we moved forward. Her tone was different from usual, more formal and careful. She said that while she supported me and believed my account of what happened, the setup with the Yale letter was creating complications from a policy perspective. She explained that some people were questioning whether the evidence was obtained fairly and that it might affect how the investigation proceeded. I felt my face get hot because it sounded like she was scolding me for the exact plan we had made together. She kept talking about optics and procedures, but all I heard was that I had done something wrong by exposing what Mrs. White said. When she finished, I stood up without saying much and left her office feeling betrayed by someone I thought was on my side. I pulled out my phone in the hallway and texted my mom about what just happened. She replied immediately saying we might need to document that conversation too, and asking if I remembered exactly what Principal Lint said. I tried to write down the key points while they were fresh in my memory. That evening, I was doing homework at the kitchen table when someone knocked on our front door. My mom answered, and it was Chase standing there with a thick folder under his arm. He asked if he could come in and talk to me about something important. We sat in the living room, and he opened the folder which was full of printed emails and documents about his cousin. He showed me a timeline he had put together of how everything happened with the Cornell scholarship. There was the acceptance letter dated in March, then an anonymous email to the admissions office in April claiming gang affiliations, then the scholarship revocation letter in May. Chase had somehow gotten copies of the emails between Cornell and the high school, and one of them referenced a concerned teacher providing information about student safety. He pointed to the dates and showed me how it all lined up right after his cousin had an argument with Miss White about a grade. Seeing it all documented like that made me feel vindicated because it proved there was a pattern, but it also scared me because Mrs. White had been doing this for years and getting away with it. Chase said his family never knew who sent the tip, and his cousin just thought it was bad luck, or maybe another student. We sat there going through all the papers, and I took pictures of the key documents with my phone. When Chase left around 8, my mom asked what that was all about, and I showed her the photos. She stared at them for a long time and said, "This was bigger than just what happened to me." The next morning, I had an email from Christabel asking if my mom and I had documented any prior complaints or concerns about Mrs. White. She wanted anything we had in writing, including emails, text messages, or notes about conversations. That night, my mom and I spent 2 hours going through her phone and email looking for anything relevant. We found at least a dozen instances where I had texted her about problematic comments Mrs. White made. There was one from October where I told her Miss White said something about urban students not being prepared for advanced classes. Another from November about how Mrs. White questioned whether I actually wrote my own essay. We copied everything into a document with dates and context. My mom kept apologizing and saying she wished she had escalated things sooner instead of just telling me to keep my head down. I told her it wasn't her fault and that I didn't want to make waves back then either. We sent everything to Christabel around 11 at night. The next day at the school, I was walking to lunch when I overheard 2 girls talking about an Instagram account that was posting about me. I checked my phone and found it immediately because someone had tagged me. The account had no profile picture, and the username was just random letters and numbers. The posts were all about how I was the quota kid who set up a teacher and ruined her career. My DMs were flooded with messages. Some people sent supportive things saying they believed me, but a lot of them were hostile. One message said I was ruining a good teacher's career over a joke, and that I should be ashamed. Another said I only got into college because of affirmative action, and now I was trying to take down someone who called it out. I read through maybe 20 messages before I had to stop because my hands were shaking. I turned off notifications for Instagram and put my phone in my backpack. The rest of lunch, I just sat by myself, trying to calm down and feeling anxious about going back to the school the next day. That afternoon, Leah sent me a link to a Google Doc she had created. The document had a statement at the top condemning bias in the classroom and supporting students who speak up about discrimination. She asked people to add their names if they agreed. I signed it right away, and by the end of the day, about 30 students had added their names. But when I looked at the list, I noticed a lot of kids from my classes weren't on it, including Sophie. The split felt like it was creating sides, and I wasn't sure if that helped or hurt the situation. The next morning, the teachers' union sent a formal letter to the district demanding preservation of all evidence and due process for Mrs. White. The letter somehow got leaked to a parent Facebook group, and parents started commenting about rushing to judgment and protecting teachers from false accusations. The tone around school shifted and felt more hostile. Teachers who used to smile at me in the hallway now looked away or walked past without acknowledging me. I felt the weight of institutional protection closing ranks around one of their own. During study hall, I checked my email and found one from someone named Quentin Ray, who worked for the local news outlet. He said he was reporting on allegations of discrimination at the high school and wanted to know if I would be willing to comment. He promised he could keep me anonymous if I wanted and said he was committed to telling the full story fairly. I stared at the email for 20 minutes trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to respond and get my side out there, but another part was scared of making things worse or looking like I was trying to manipulate public opinion. Before I could reply, my mom called me and said Principal Lint had just called her. Lint strongly advised that I not speak to any reporters while the investigation was ongoing. She explained that it could compromise the process and make it look like I was trying to influence the outcome through media pressure. My mom agreed with her, even though I felt frustrated at being told to stay quiet while rumors spread and people attacked me online. The next day, during my free period, Ramona asked me to come by her office. She had printed out information about filing a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights at the federal level. She explained that this would be separate from the district investigation and could provide another layer of accountability. She walked me through what the process would involve, including filling out forms and providing documentation. She said it was completely my choice, but that it might be worth considering. I told her I needed to think about it and talk to my mom before deciding anything. The next morning, I walked into the classroom, and there was a substitute teacher standing at the front, a middle-aged woman with glasses who looked nervous. She introduced herself, but I barely heard the name because the second I sat down, the atmosphere felt wrong. Some kids were staring at their desks like they couldn't look at me, while others kept glancing over like they wanted to say something but didn't know how. The sub started handing out worksheets, and the room stayed weird and quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet, but the heavy kind where everyone's thinking about the same thing. About halfway through class, this kid named James, who I'd maybe talked to twice, leaned over and whispered something. I had to ask him to repeat it because I didn't catch it the first time, and he said it again, barely audible. I nodded and told him I was fine, even though my stomach was twisted up, and I wasn't sure that was true. The rest of the period dragged on forever with the sub trying to teach, but clearly sensing something was off, and when the bell finally rang, I grabbed my stuff and got out of there as fast as I could. During lunch, Leah found me in the hallway and pulled me aside near the lockers. She had this look on her face like she was bursting to tell me something, and before I could even ask, she started talking about how Christabel had interviewed Beth yesterday afternoon. Leah said Beth was really nervous going into it, like visibly shaking, but she told Christabel everything she remembered from that day. The important stuff about my mom working 3 jobs, the threats about immigration checks even though my family's been here forever, all of it. Leah said Beth even brought up how Mrs. White had made similar comments before but quieter, and how other kids had heard them too. Knowing that Beth backed me up made something loosen in my chest, because Beth is popular and has friends and a good reputation, so it's not just my word anymore. It's not just the kid who transferred from the inner city claiming a teacher was racist. Beth has nothing to gain from lying and everything to lose from getting involved, and she still told the truth. I thanked Leah for letting me know, and she squeezed my arm before heading to the cafeteria, and I stood there for a minute just breathing. That afternoon, I was sitting in study hall trying to focus on homework when I got a notification on my phone. Someone had texted me a link to an article from the local paper, and when I opened it, the headline made my stomach drop. It said something about a bias complaint under review at the local high school, and even though they didn't use any names, the details were specific enough that anyone who went here would know exactly what it was about. The article talked about allegations of discriminatory comments and threats, and it mentioned the union's concerns about due process and not rushing to judgment. I read the whole thing once, then read it again, then a third time, and each time I felt more exposed. They kept it balanced and professional, but seeing it laid out like that in print made everything feel more real and more public. My name wasn't in it, but it might as well have been because everyone at the school already knew. I screenshot the article and sent it to my mom, then put my phone away and stared at my textbook without actually reading any of the words. When I got home that day, my little brother was already there, sitting on the couch with his backpack still on and his face all red like he'd been crying. I asked him what was wrong, and he looked up at me with this expression that made me feel like garbage. He said some kids at his middle school were making fun of him, calling him the brother of the kid who got a teacher fired, asking if our whole family were troublemakers. One kid even said I probably lied about everything just to get attention. My brother asked me straight up if I did something wrong, if I got Miss White in trouble for no reason, and I had to sit down next to him and explain the whole situation in a way that made sense to an 11-year-old. I told him about the comments Miss White made about Dad, about Mom, about how she treated me different from other kids because of where I came from. I told him I didn't lie, and I didn't make anything up, and that sometimes doing the right thing means other people get mad at you. He listened and nodded, but I could tell he was still upset, and I promised him I'd talk to his school counselor if the teasing kept up. After that, we sat there for a while not saying anything, and I felt guilty that my decision to speak up was affecting him when he didn't do anything wrong. That night after dinner, I pulled up the information Ramona had given me about filing a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights. My laptop was open on the kitchen table, and I stared at the website for a few minutes before actually starting the form. The questions were detailed and specific, asking about dates and times and exact things that were said. I referenced my timeline document that I'd put together weeks ago, the one with all the incidents organized by date. I mentioned the Zoom recording and attached a link to where it was stored. There were sections about what kind of discrimination I experienced and how the school responded, and I filled everything out as carefully as I could. When I got to the end and hit the submit button, an automated email popped up in my inbox with a confirmation number and information about what happens next. For the first time in days, I felt like I had some control over the situation, instead of just waiting around for other people to decide my fate. It was a small thing, but it mattered, knowing that someone outside the school district would be looking at this too. Over the next few days, my Instagram DMs started filling up with messages from people I didn't know. At first, I thought they were more hate messages like the ones I'd gotten before, but when I actually read them, I realized they were from alumni. people who'd graduated years ago. One person who graduated 5 years back said Miss White made comments about her hijab all the time, asking if she was hot under there or if her parents forced her to wear it. Another person from 3 years ago said Miss White constantly questioned his grades and accused him of cheating even though he never did, and that she told his parents he only got into college because of affirmative action. There were more messages like that, a whole pattern of the same behavior going back years, and each one made me angrier. These people had dealt with the same stuff I did and never reported it, either because they didn't think anyone would believe them or because they just wanted to graduate and move on. I screenshot every single message and forwarded them to Christabel with a note explaining what they were. The pattern was overwhelming and clear, and I hoped it would make a difference in the investigation. A few days after that, I got an email from Principal Lint saying that Christabel had requested access to Ms. White's gradebooks and parent email records going back 5 years. Lint explained that the district was cooperating, but it was taking time to compile everything while making sure other students' privacy was protected. She said they had to redact names and personal information before turning anything over, and that the process would take at least another week. I read the email and felt frustrated because I wanted answers now, not in another week or another month. Every day that went by felt like forever, and I was tired of waiting for adults to move at their slow pace while I dealt with the fallout at the school. But I was also learning that this is how things work, that institutional processes don't care about how impatient you are, and that sometimes you just have to wait, even when it sucks. That same week, the district posted the agenda for the upcoming school board meeting on their website. I was checking my email when Ramona sent me a link to it, and one of the items listed was public comment on the school climate and safety. Ramona explained in her message that this was an opportunity for community members to speak directly to the board and that anyone could sign up for a 3-minute slot. The second I read that, my nerves spiked and my hands started shaking. The idea of standing up in front of the school board and a room full of parents and teachers made me want to throw up. When my mom got home from work, I showed her the agenda and asked what she thought. She sat down at the table and read it carefully, then looked at me and said, "We should think about it." She didn't say yes or no, just that it was a big decision, and we needed to consider whether it would help or make things worse. The next day, an email went out to all the staff from someone named Solomon Glover, the union rep. Parts of it got leaked to students within hours because someone's parent was a teacher and showed them, and by lunch everyone was talking about it. The email didn't name Ms. White specifically, but it was obvious who it was about, and it talked about trial by media and protecting teachers from false allegations. There were phrases about rushing to judgment and careers being destroyed based on accusations and how due process matters. When I read the leaked screenshots, I felt deflated, like all the evidence I'd gathered and all the witnesses who backed me up didn't matter compared to the system protecting its own. The union was circling the wagons and making it sound like I was the problem, like I was some kid making stuff up to ruin a good teacher's life. I showed the email to my mom that night, and she got this tired look on her face, the kind that said she'd seen this before and knew how it would go. The day after that, I went to see Ramona during my free period and told her I wanted to speak at the board meeting. She pulled out a notebook, and we started working on a statement together, something short and factual that focused on specific things Ms. White said instead of general complaints about racism. Ramona helped me organize my thoughts and coached me on staying calm, even if people reacted badly, reminding me to breathe and stick to my prepared remarks no matter what. We worked on it for almost an hour, going through multiple drafts until we had something that was clear and direct without being emotional or accusatory. The statement listed exact quotes from Miss White about my mom's jobs, about my dad, about the threats she made, and it asked the board to ensure transparent accountability in their investigation. When we finished, I saved the document on my phone and read through it a few more times. Writing it all out made the idea of actually standing up and speaking feel less scary, like I had a plan, instead of just walking into something blind. Ramona told me I was brave for doing this, and that she'd be there at the meeting to support me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe I could actually get through this. 2 days later, I got called to Principal Lint's office for what the email described as a planning meeting, and when I walked in, my mom was already sitting there in her work uniform, looking tired from her morning shift. Principal Lint started by saying she wanted to discuss my plan to speak at the board meeting, and her tone immediately put me on edge. She said that while she understood my desire to participate, it might be better for everyone if I let the investigation process play out without adding public pressure. I felt my face get hot and my hands clenched in my lap as she talked about how speaking could escalate tensions and make it harder for the district to handle things properly. My mom looked at me, and I could see she was waiting to hear what I wanted, so I took a breath and told Principal Lint respectfully that I had a right to speak, and that staying silent for 3 months hadn't protected me from anything. I said the board needed to hear directly from me what happened, not just read it in reports, and that I wasn't going to hide anymore. My mom nodded and backed me up, telling Principal Lint that we'd made our decision as a family and that I would be speaking at the meeting. Principal Lint's expression shifted, and she looked uncomfortable, but she dropped it, just reminding us that public comments were limited to 3 minutes and that I should stick to facts. Walking out of that office, I felt shaky, but also more sure than I'd been in weeks that I was doing the right thing. The next afternoon, I was checking my email between classes when I saw a message from Quentin asking if I had any documents I'd be willing to share for a follow-up story he was working on. He said he wanted to make sure the reporting was accurate and fair and that he could redact anything identifying if needed. I stared at my phone for a few minutes trying to decide, then pulled up the screenshots I'd saved of some of Ms. White's worst comments and the timeline Ramona and I had put together. I went through and blacked out other students' names and any details that might identify specific people, then attached the redacted versions to a reply. I wrote that I was sending these, but that I wasn't willing to do an on-record interview right now, and he responded within an hour, thanking me and promising to handle everything carefully. I sat in the library after hitting send, wondering if I'd just made things better or worse, hoping I was making the right call, but not entirely sure. The following day, I was walking past the teacher's lounge on my way to the bathroom when I heard voices through the partially open door. One of them belonged to a teacher whose class I'd taken freshman year, someone I'd always thought was pretty cool and fair. I slowed down without meaning to and heard her talking to another woman about how the whole situation with Miss White was being blown out of proportion. The other voice I recognized as Sophie's mom, who taught math, and she was agreeing. The first teacher said something about how kids today are too sensitive and too quick to claim racism when they just don't like being held accountable. My stomach twisted, and I forced myself to keep walking instead of stopping or saying something. I'd trusted that teacher and thought she understood what it was like for students like me, but hearing her defend Ms. White's context excuse made me realize that more teachers than I'd thought were circling the wagons. The feeling of betrayal stuck with me for the rest of the day. That same week, Chase pulled me aside after school and asked if we could talk somewhere private. We ended up sitting in his car in the parking lot, and he told me what had happened in the locker room the day before. Some of his teammates had been spreading rumors that I was making everything up for attention or trying to get out of trouble for bad grades. Chase said he'd confronted them right there, telling them about Deshawn and how the same teacher had destroyed his cousin's future with lies. He explained that Deshawn had never been in a gang, had never done anything wrong, and that one anonymous email had cost him everything. Chase's voice got tight when he talked about how his teammates had basically turned on him for defending me, guys he'd been friends with since middle school, who now thought he was choosing sides against the team. When he finished, I didn't know what to say, because part of me felt grateful that he'd stood up for me, but another part felt guilty that it was costing him friendships. I managed to tell him thanks, and that it meant a lot, and he just shrugged and said it was the right thing to do, even if it sucked. A few days after that, Christabel called and asked if I could come by the district office with my mom. When we got there, she had her laptop open and a serious expression on her face. She explained that while going through old records, she'd discovered something about the anonymous tip that had gone to Cornell about Deshawn. The email had come from an account that traced back to a school computer, one that Miss White had regular access to along with a few other teachers. Christabel was careful to say it wasn't definite proof yet, because other people used that computer too, but it was the first real link between Ms. White and what happened to Deshawn's scholarship. She said she was working with Cornell to get more details about the original complaint and the timeline. When Chase came over later that evening, I showed him the notes Christabel had given us, and we sat at my kitchen table feeling something between hope and caution. The evidence was building, but we both knew it might not be enough to prove anything for sure. The next week, an official-looking envelope arrived in the mail with a return address from the Office for Civil Rights. Inside was a formal letter acknowledging my complaint and assigning it a case number along with contact information for the investigator who would be handling it. The letter explained that their investigation could take several months and involved interviewing multiple parties and reviewing all the evidence. Several months felt impossibly long when I was living this every single day, and I realized that even with federal involvement, there weren't going to be any quick fixes. I took the letter up to my room and pinned the case number to my bulletin board next to my Yale acceptance letter, creating a weird timeline of the best and worst things happening to me at the same time. At least someone outside the district was paying attention. 2 days before the board meeting, I had an appointment with Ramona during my free period. She mentioned casually that Yale's regional admissions contact had called the school asking to speak with her about me. Ramona said the woman had been very clear that my acceptance stood firm regardless of what was happening at the school, and that Yale was monitoring the situation. They wouldn't make any public statements because they wanted to stay neutral, but knowing that Yale wasn't wavering or second-guessing their decision gave me some relief. At the same time, I felt kind of isolated because they were staying on the sidelines while I was in the middle of a fight that was partly about whether I deserved to be there in the first place. Ramona must have seen something in my face because she reminded me that institutions move slowly, but that Yale's private support still mattered. The night before the board meeting, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed until midnight trying to shut my brain off, then gave up and went downstairs. At 2 a.m, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my printed statement in front of me, reading it over and over and making tiny edits that probably didn't matter. My mom came out in her bathrobe and sat down across from me without saying anything for a minute. Then she asked if I was sure I wanted to do this. Really sure, because once I spoke, there was no taking it back. We talked about what speaking up really costs and whether it's worth it, about how some people would never believe me no matter what evidence I had. She told me about times she'd had to decide whether to stay quiet or make waves at her jobs and how those choices had shaped her life. Finally, she said she was proud of me, no matter what I decided to do, that choosing to speak took courage, but so did choosing to protect yourself. Something about hearing her say that steadied me enough that I could finally go back to bed and get a few hours of sleep. The board meeting was held in the district administration building in a room that felt too bright and too formal. I sat in the third row with my mom on one side and Ramona on the other, my printed statement folded in my sweating hands. When the public comment period started and they called my name, I walked up to the microphone on legs that felt disconnected from my body. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled as I unfolded it and started reading. I went through the specific quotes Ms. White had said, including the threats about my mother's jobs and the admission about sabotaging Deshawn. I didn't add any extra commentary or attack anyone. I just read what had happened and asked the board to ensure transparent accountability in their investigation. My voice stayed mostly steady, even though I could feel dozens of eyes on me, and when I finished and walked back to my seat, my hands were still trembling, but my head felt clear. I'd said what I needed to say. Chase spoke next, and his voice was different from I'd ever heard it, steady and serious without any of his usual joking tone. He told Deshawn's story in detail, explaining how his cousin had worked his whole life to get into Cornell, and how one anonymous email had destroyed everything. He connected the dots between the tip and Miss White's access to the school computers, laying out the timeline in a way that made the pattern impossible to ignore. He talked about how Deshawn was working at a dollar store now instead of studying engineering, how that one lie had changed the entire direction of his life. The room felt heavy with the weight of what he was saying, and I could see several board members taking notes. Superintendent Scarlett was watching with a grim expression that I couldn't quite read, and when Chase finished speaking and returned to his seat, the silence lasted several long seconds before the next person was called up. The board president called for a short recess before they'd deliberate, and people started filing out to the hallway or checking their phones. My mom squeezed my hand and asked if I needed water, but I just shook my head and stayed in my seat, watching the board members gather their papers and head through the side door marked private. The closed session lasted way longer than I expected, over an hour of sitting in that too bright room with my stomach in knots, while other people whispered in small groups around us. Some parents kept glancing over at me and my mom, and I couldn't tell if they were sympathetic or judging. When the board finally filed back in and everyone took their seats again, the room went quiet in a way that made my ears ring. The board president adjusted her microphone and cleared her throat, then read from a prepared statement about how they'd reviewed the preliminary evidence and determined that extended administrative leave was appropriate pending the completion of the investigation. She said the district would also conduct an independent review of equity policies and procedures to ensure all students felt safe and supported. It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, no immediate firing or public condemnation, but it was more than I'd expected going into this meeting. I felt my shoulders drop a little bit as the tension released, and my mom's hand found mine again. The board president continued reading about timelines and next steps, using careful language that probably came from lawyers, and I tried to focus on the fact that at least something was happening. At least I'd been heard. The relief felt measured and cautious, not celebratory, because I knew this was just one step in what would probably be a long process. After the board finished their announcement, the president opened the floor for final public comments, and that's when Solomon Glover stood up and walked to the microphone. I recognized him from Ramona's warnings about the union's involvement, a middle-aged guy in a suit who looked completely comfortable in front of a crowd. He introduced himself as representing the teachers' union and launched into a statement about the importance of due process and not rushing to judgment based on incomplete information. His voice was calm and reasonable, the kind of tone that makes you second-guess yourself even when you know you're right. He talked about how teachers deserve fair treatment and thorough investigations before any permanent decisions are made, and he emphasized that allegations alone shouldn't destroy someone's career. The crowd reacted with scattered applause from some corners and uncomfortable murmurs from others, and I felt my brief moment of relief start to crack. Even with the board's decision, even with all the evidence, there were still people who saw me as the problem, the troublemaker who'd gone after a teacher. Solomon wrapped up his statement with something about protecting the integrity of the profession, and when he sat down, I caught my mom's eye and saw my own frustration reflected back at me. It was a reality check that kept me from feeling too good about what had just happened, a reminder that this fight wasn't over and that plenty of people still didn't believe me or didn't care. I left the meeting feeling drained and conflicted, like I'd won something, but also lost something I couldn't quite name. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with notifications, and when I checked it, I saw that Quentin's article had gone live on the local news site. The headline read, "Board places teacher on leave amid discrimination investigation," and my stomach did a flip as I clicked through to read it. The article was balanced but damning, including direct quotes from the public comments I'd made and Chase's testimony about his cousin, plus some of the documentation we'd provided and perspectives from multiple sides, including the union's statement about due process. Quentin had done his homework, laying out the timeline and the evidence without sensationalizing it, but also not pulling any punches about what had been said and done. Suddenly, the story felt bigger than just our school, like it had escaped the building and was out there for anyone to see. My phone kept buzzing as the article got shared, and people I hadn't heard from in years started sending messages, some supportive, and some asking what really happened. I scrolled through texts from old friends from my previous school, distant cousins, even a teacher from middle school, all of them having opinions about something they only knew from one article. It felt overwhelming and exposing, like I'd wanted people to know, but now that they did, I wasn't sure how to handle it. I got ready for school moving slower than usual, dreading walking through those doors now that everyone would definitely know the full story. Walking through the hallways that morning felt completely different in ways both good and bad, like the whole building had shifted overnight. Some teachers I barely knew went out of their way to stop me and say they supported what I was doing, telling me I was brave or that they were glad someone had spoken up. One of them, a math teacher I'd never even had, squeezed my shoulder and said she'd seen too much swept under the rug over the years. But other teachers avoided eye contact or literally ducked into classrooms when they saw me coming, and that felt almost worse than outright hostility, because at least hostility is honest. I passed the science wing and saw two teachers I used to think were cool whispering and going quiet when I got close, and I kept my head down and walked faster. The split was uncomfortable and obvious, this clear divide between people who believed me and people who thought I'd gone too far or made too big a deal out of things. At lunch, I sat with Chase and Leah, and Chase mentioned that he'd heard similar reactions from teachers, some thanking him for speaking up about his cousin, and others giving him the cold shoulder. At least we knew where people stood now, even if knowing didn't make it feel any better. After school, I got a text from Ramona asking if I'd be interested in a peer support group she was organizing for students who'd experienced bias or discrimination, and I said yes immediately. The first meeting was that Thursday in one of the smaller conference rooms, and about a dozen kids showed up, more than I expected. Some of them I recognized from classes or the hallways, but others were younger students I'd never really noticed before. Ramona started by explaining that this was a safe space to share experiences and resources, and that everything said in the room stayed confidential unless someone was in danger. One by one, kids started talking, sharing stories about teachers who'd made comments about their names or accents, about being followed in stores, about guidance counselors who steered them away from advanced classes. Hearing other people's stories made me feel less alone, like I wasn't the only one dealing with this stuff, or the only one who'd noticed patterns that other people wanted to ignore. We talked about coping strategies and ways to document things, and Ramona handed out resource sheets with information about filing complaints and finding support. By the time the meeting ended, I felt more connected than I had in weeks, like I was part of something constructive instead of just fighting alone. A few kids came up to me afterward and thanked me for speaking up at the board meeting, saying it had given them courage to think about reporting their own experiences. The next day, Principal Lint asked to meet with me privately in her office, and I walked in feeling guarded after how she'd reacted before about the setup with the Yale letter. She closed the door and asked me to sit, then apologized for her earlier tone when she'd questioned my methods. She admitted she'd been worried about legal liability and hadn't fully considered what I'd been dealing with for months, and that she should have focused more on supporting me and less on managing risk. She promised to send me regular updates about the investigation within what policy allowed, and said she wanted to repair the trust between us. I appreciated the effort, even though I was still wary, still remembering how it had felt to be scolded by someone I thought was on my side. We talked for a few minutes about how things were going at the school and whether I felt safe, and she offered to arrange schedule changes if I needed them. I told her I was managing and that the support group was helping, and she nodded and made a note about continuing that program. When I left her office, I felt a little bit better about our relationship, like maybe she was genuinely trying to do better. That same week, the district sent out an email announcing the formation of an equity advisory committee and inviting parents, students, and community members to apply. The application asked about experiences with discrimination and ideas for policy changes, and it felt like a real opportunity to have input instead of just reacting to whatever decisions got made. I filled out the application that night at the kitchen table, writing carefully about what I'd experienced and what I thought needed to change, including better reporting systems and mandatory training for teachers. My mom filled one out too, and so did Chase and Leah when I sent them the link. We all hoped this would lead to actual change and not just be a box-checking exercise, but at least it was something concrete we could do. A few days later, Christabel called my mom to schedule a meeting to preview her preliminary findings, and we drove to the district office together on a Tuesday afternoon. We sat in the same conference room where I'd done my first interview, and Principal Lint joined us a few minutes later looking serious. Christabel went through her findings methodically, explaining that she was substantiating multiple policy violations, including harassment and abuse of authority based on the evidence and witness statements. She walked us through specific incidents and how they violated district policies, and it felt validating to hear someone official confirm that what had happened wasn't okay or normal. But then she got to the part about outcomes, and her tone shifted to something more cautious. She explained that the final consequences would be limited by the union contract and district procedures, and that while the evidence was strong, it was unlikely Mrs. White would face criminal charges. The harassment was documented, but didn't rise to the level of criminal conduct, and the threats about my mom's jobs were hard to prosecute without proof of actual action. Hearing that even with all the evidence and all the witnesses, the consequences still had limits felt like getting punched in the gut. Christabel kept talking about progressive discipline and separation agreements, but I'd stopped really listening, just nodding while my brain processed the gap between what felt like justice and what was actually possible. Over the next few days, rumors started spreading that Mrs. White and the district were negotiating a separation agreement instead of going through a formal termination hearing. I first heard it from Ramona, who'd heard it from another administrator during a staff meeting. The idea that Mrs. White might just leave quietly with some kind of payout or neutral reference felt completely wrong, like she was getting away with everything. But another part of me, the part that was exhausted from months of fighting, felt relieved that it might finally be over. No more hearings or meetings or having to relive everything over and over. Chase had a different reaction when I told him, saying it felt like the district was protecting her reputation instead of holding her accountable, and he wasn't wrong. We debated whether quiet resolution was better than a drawn-out fight that might not end any differently, and neither of us had a good answer. Meanwhile, the Office for Civil Rights sent me an email confirming they'd assigned an investigator and begun their review, but the message emphasized that their process would take many months and involve interviewing multiple parties. They couldn't share details about their timeline or methodology, just that they'd received my complaint and were moving forward. I saved the email in a folder on my laptop and tried to refocus on my schoolwork, which had taken a serious hit during everything that had been happening. My grades had slipped from mostly A's and B's to a mix of B's and C's, and I had a chemistry test coming up that I was completely unprepared for. I spent that weekend catching up on assignments and studying, trying to accept that the investigation and resolution were going to take a long time, and I couldn't put my whole life on hold, waiting for it to be finished. 6 weeks passed in a blur of chemistry tests and history papers, and trying to act normal while waiting for news. Then one Tuesday morning, I woke up to an email from the district office with the subject line, Personnel Update. I opened it on my phone before getting out of bed and read the 2-paragraph press release 3 times. Miss White and the district had reached a mutual separation agreement. She wouldn't be returning to the classroom. No other details were provided due to personnel privacy laws. I sat there staring at the words, mutual separation agreement, and felt this weird mix of relief and anger. She was gone, which meant I could walk into that classroom without my stomach twisting. But the phrase mutual separation made it sound like both sides agreed, like it was a friendly parting instead of what it actually was. The full story would never be public. All the evidence and all the witnesses in that recording, and it still ended with careful corporate language that protected everyone's reputation. I forwarded the email to my mom and Chase without adding any comment because I didn't know what to say. At the school that day, The reactions split right down the middle. A sophomore I barely knew stopped me in the hallway to say I did the right thing, and that Ms. White had made comments about her accent too. Leah gave me a hug between classes and said she was proud of me. But I also heard whispers near my locker about how I ruined a teacher's career over comments taken out of context. Someone wrote "snitch" on my chemistry notebook when I wasn't looking. A group of seniors who were friends with Sophie gave me dirty looks in the cafeteria. I started keeping my head down and my earbuds in between classes, developing this thick skin I didn't have before. Ramona checked in with me during lunch and asked how I was handling everything. I told her I was fine, which was only partly true. She reminded me that I had the recording and the evidence, and that some people would never believe it no matter what. That helped a little. I kept telling myself that the people who mattered knew the truth, and the rest didn't matter. It was easier some days than others. 2 weeks after the press release, Principal Lint called me down to her office to tell me about a new scholarship fund. A group of community donors had quietly put together money for students facing financial barriers. The district was also expanding subsidies for field trips and activities. She handed me an application for the scholarship and said I should definitely apply. I took the papers and thanked her, but felt uncomfortable about the whole thing. That night I filled out the application because my mom said it would be stupid not to, but when the permission slip for the upcoming field trip came around, I didn't turn it in. The trip was to a science museum 2 hours away, something I would have loved before all this happened. But going felt like making it about me, like I was the reason the subsidies existed. Plus, I didn't want to spend 6 hours on a bus with kids who thought I was a snitch. Chase asked why I wasn't going, and I made up something about having too much homework. He didn't push it. The changes felt meaningful even if they came from a painful situation, but I wasn't ready to be the face of them. 7 weeks after everything started, I was sitting at my desk working through Yale's orientation materials and financial aid forms. My room was quiet, except for the sound of my little brother playing video games in the living room. I had a checklist of things to complete before the deadline, and I was checking them off one by one, feeling steadier than I had in months. It wasn't a clean win with perfect justice like I'd imagined when I first planned the whole thing with Principal Lint. Miss White got to leave quietly with a separation agreement instead of a public reckoning. Some kids at the school still thought I was wrong for setting her up. The federal investigation would take months and might not result in anything more than what already happened, but she was gone. I could walk into that classroom without my chest tightening. The district was changing policies, even if it took something painful to make it happen. I learned that speaking up was messy and complicated and didn't come with a neat ending, but it was still necessary. I was clearer now about what it took to stand up for yourself, about how justice in real life looked different from justice in your head. My Yale acceptance letter was pinned to the bulletin board above my desk, and I glanced at it while filling out the housing preference form. I was ready for whatever came next. Hold up, before you go. I have to know what you would have done in TJ's shoes. Would you have set up the Yale letter trap or just gone straight to the feds? The comments section is all yours, and yes, I read every single one. Subscribe because next week's story is even wilder, and I need your theories.